Welcome to Forum 360. I'm Sally Henning. Today we're talking about music and music communication. And our special guest today from Canton, Ohio is Herman Rubin, who is a musician, a researcher, a lecturer, and a piano tuner. Welcome to Forum 360, Herman.
I am so delighted to be here and delighted that you've asked me to come.
Oh, thank you. Now, we're going to talk about musical communication today, and I want to start by asking you to define for us music communication. But before you do that, I want to tell our audience a little bit about you. I know that you've lectured extensively, not just with the Canton Symphony Orchestra, but also with Carnegie Mellon University. Recently, you were in Pennsylvania for a function called Sensory Experience, which we'll talk about a little bit later, and some other, many other places. At times you've been interviewed on radio and whatnot, and you've been on TV before. But let's start off with, what is music communication?
Music communication is something that has been with us since the beginning of time. It is what man has always wanted to do and longed to do. It is just necessary of having conversations with your neighbor or your spouse. It's wanting to express it in many different ways, and musical communication is that chief way, through sounds, through vocal and instrumental sounds. It is a primordial force that has been with us throughout the ages, and it is probably one of the most important means of communications that we have ever had.
How is it universal or local? Is musical communication universal? It
is rather debatable as far as what constitutes universal musical communication. There are the usual cliches of music is the universal language of mankind, but how many of you can sit through a Hindu raga with the having to stay awake for an extensive amount of time period while it's going on? Well,
wait. What's a Hindu raga?
It's
easy for you to say.
It is easy for me to say, and I don't know much about it. But what makes it universal is the fact that we are all making music at all times. You and I are making music right now as we speak to each other. Our voices are music. Our voices are made up entirely of harmonics and overtones, which are emphasized or de-emphasized according to the shape of our mouths, noses, and throats, and our oral cavities, which every person's was uniquely constituted before we were born. When a mother knows the sound of her babies, and she knows how to separate them from the sounds of other babies around her, and she knows instinctively that it's hers, simply because of the type of music that voice makes. So you and I are making music right now as we talk to each other. There's a famous scene in Meredith Willson's The Music Man where he's teaching the members of the Board of Education who are about to form the barbershop quartet how to sing. He said, all you have to do is remember that singing is just nothing but sustained talking. And all you have to do is just remember to talk on those perfect pitch, on a specific pitch. Well, singing, of course, is, everything that has either been written down or improvised. But even now, speech is formed by two basic impulses: ictus plus glide. Ictus is an attack. As I attack each sound, that's an ictus, and as I glide, that's the second part of human speech. So that is just as much music as sustained singing is a note. So that everything that we say to each other is nothing but a pitch event.
So where did the concept of where did musical communication start in your mind?
In my mind, it began actually with primitive man. We know that organized music came about through the intercession of all the great empires of the world have had stream of organized music, and organized Western music began with Pope Gregory and his creation of Gregorian Chants. But organized music goes back even farther than that. You could take it back into biblical times. In fact, reading the Bible, certain musical instruments such as trumpets and harps are mentioned in various ways. The song of the sea, at the sea, sung by Miriam after the children of Israel were freed from Egyptian bondage, was an actual song that the women actually sang for their redemption. So we know that music goes back into that kind of time. What about African music, or maybe Native American music? When there was war on the horizon, they would warm each other, whether with the use of improvised drums or percussion instruments, and of course the war whoops that they make.
There's a long history of music for communication and for military purposes.
Yes.
Including on the use of trumpets.
Including the use of trumpets. The walls of Jericho came down from the use of trumpets. That's a well-known biblical fact.
So communication is not just necessarily for peaceful purposes.
It's not, no. It's for all different types of purposes, but those are some of the big purposes that come to mind.
Because, when I think of musical communication, I tend to think of, the hippies and peace and love, but it's not necessarily just for that.
That's a recent development, though. I mean, we can go, the peace and love movements can go back into farther centuries. The creation of opera in around 1600 was for the purpose of telling a historical or fanciful story through means of all the arts, music and language and oral communication, as well as dance and other forms of theater.
What were some of the first operas that were used for communication purposes?
The first opera written was Claudio Monteverdi's Orfeo, and that was around 1600. And it was the well-known story of Orpheus and Eurydice.
The well-known story, okay.
Well, maybe not a well-known story, but it's a story. It's a story of the Greek god Orpheus, who descends to the underworld to rescue Eurydice, and he is told, "Don't look back at her, or you'll lose her." Well, they got into the Elysian fields, and he made the mistake of looking back at her. And unfortunately, unlike the opera's romantic drift, where he actually gets to have her at the end, he loses her, and that's the end.
So we've talked about some of the earlier aspects of musical communication. Let's come forward a few thousand years and talk about, with all the advances in modern day musical instruments and musical, what do you see as the future, or the effect of musical communication in the future?
Well, the future is a double-edged sword. If all of the electronic devices that have been created in the past 50 years can coalesce and coexist with a sort of team atmosphere with the traditional acoustic instruments, then we have something that can be very special. And it's been proven that it's been done. But if a takeover of musicological form through electronic instruments is accomplished, then something great is lost.
Well,
I worry about, for instance, the future generations not knowing what a violin sounds like because it's being electronically reproduced.
Well, when you refer to acoustical instruments, would you sort of define that? Are you talking about guitars, violins?
I'm talking about the traditional orchestral instruments, pianos, pipe organs, harps, percussion instruments, and so forth. That's what I mean by the traditional acoustical instruments.
And what's the trend is to replace them with computers?
Well, to replace them with computers and synthesizers and so forth. And there are a lot of fascinating things that come out. I've spent time with people who are heavily into the electronic scene, and they can do some marvelous marvelous things with it, but it can also amount to a takeover of everything that we, as I said to you before, I fear what happens if people are going to forget what the outside of recordings, what the sound of an acoustical instrument does sound like.
Well, with respect, are there some positive aspects of the modern day trends?
Well, yes, if they are allowed to function as just a normal part of a musical scene, yes, I think that they could be a positive aspect if they're allowed to function along with the world. If the electronic world and the acoustical world are allowed to function together in concord with each other, yes, I think it could be a marvelous experience.
Concord, isn't that where the shot was fired that was heard around the world? That was another kind of communication.
Well, yes, and I think that's where the wine came from too.
You've been tuned into Forum 360. Today we're talking about musical communication, and we're speaking with Herman Rubin, who is a lecturer and researcher, musician, and piano tuner. Herman, recently you were in Pennsylvania for something called the Sensory Experience program. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes. This is a very unique opportunity that was set up by some people in Greenville, Pennsylvania, along with some local symphony musicians, along with conductor Michael Gelfand, and they decided to put on an unusual type of symphonic concert where blind people, especially children, mostly children, would be invited to sit among the members of the orchestra to watch them rehearse, to feel the vibrations of the instruments, and to actually understand what's going on during a rehearsal, as Michael Gelfand rehearsed the Greenville Symphony Orchestra. And during that time and after that time, these children were allowed to walk among the players, ask them questions. They were allowed to touch the instruments and to hold them and to feel what they were like and to feel the vibrations in their hands. During this experience, there was also a forum given by Dr. David Pinto and his wife Gail from Los Angeles. They have started a special school for budding blind musicians from ages of 5 to 18. And this would be a comprehensive music school that would teach them all about life and how to function, as well as how to play musical instruments and sing. They have all kinds of music. They employ all kinds of music teachers who are available for them, and they also have voice lessons available. And they showed during this time a DVD of their school activities, including one at the end. There was either one or two musicians, I can't remember which, but they were playing in their local high school marching band and marching with with visual people as they went along in their parade routes during football games. And these people were marching just like all the rest of them, which is not an easy thing to do for blind people.
This is a particular passion of yours, having been visually impaired pretty much all your life. Could you talk about your passion for helping people with disabilities, particularly the blind, with musical accomplishments?
Well, it's available to everybody, and in certain ways we have advantages over all the rest. Part of it is you start with the fact that
when you say we, you're referring to
blind people.
And you're talking about the advantages. The
advantages. One advantage is in terms of perfect pitch. In our society, there are very few people in our society that have perfect pitch, but among blind people, the ratio of people with perfect pitch among blind people is astounding. Something like 1 in every 100,000. Yeah. Which is rather amazing considering how few in our society have it. And we have had advances in one of the ways that we've been helped is through the creation of Braille music. Braille music has not been around for a very long time.
Now wait, now how is it that you were able to get into music as well as you have without the advantage of Braille music when you were growing up? How did this evolve?
No, I did have the advantage of Braille music when I was growing up.
Okay.
Because I was taking normal piano lessons at the same time as I was learning Braille music. I had, for the most part, two music teachers. One who was teaching me piano, as everybody else learns piano, and the other one was teaching me Braille music and learning how to read and play at the same time.
And is this now incorporated, is Braille music now incorporated into the public schools?
That's a good question. I don't know, but it's certainly incorporated into blind people's lives. It's done, the younger generations have learned it at a better rate because they can learn it much faster than I did, because they have the access to computers and so forth, which not only helps them with Braille language, but for people who sing, they can also learn verbal skills at the same time as they're learning Braille music, I think.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. So what are the things that you think are needed in schools with respect to music communication and music education?
I think in terms of music education that what is needed is a return to not just music education, but language education in general and arts education. I think that needs to be returned to the public school system. A nation dies when it loses its arts, and when we start trying to set priorities of what education is and what it is not, and when the arts are routinely cut out of the out of our schools, then something is lost. And I'm not just talking about music. It's also language communication. It's also visual arts and so forth. People who go to college who have been trained in music and the arts have better testing skills. They've done better on their SATs and ACTs. They are better all around. They are better all around conversationalists. They can work better in team situations, especially in developing as businessmen and women, and so forth. They don't have to be professional musicians per se, but they should have enough education that they have enough that they can pass it on to the next generation. And that is not what we have right now. I get calls all the time from parents in my work, and they say, well, is it all right if can my child take piano lessons and learn his exercises of music on an electric keyboard at home? And the answer is an emphatic no, because the technique for playing the piano is far different than playing an electric keyboard. And that's one of the places where I start and put my foot down for people. If you're going to take piano lessons, get a piano. Don't get a keyboard.
Well, speaking of education, you went to Kent State University?
Yes.
And tell me about your major there.
I was a speech major, oddly enough, and only did music as a minor. I was going to have a career of stage, screen, and radio. In fact, I had a radio career briefly, but I stopped it in the middle to become a piano tuner.
So when you think about other aspects of music communication, what else do you think is needed to enhance it for people and for people to have better access to the ability to communicate with music?
Well, I think to know that music is all, as I've said to you earlier, that music is all around us, and that we are all music. I think that's the place to start.
What's your favorite? What's your favorite kind of music?
Well, classical music is my favorite music, but I like other kinds as well.
Yeah, country?
No.
Folk?
No.
Opera?
Well, yes, but that's part of classical music.
Okay. As you look to the future, if you were to be involved with, and you have been involved with RTA on their board, the Canton RTA before it was started, and so you've been involved in management type things. As you think about things that the schools could do to enhance education in music, what are some of the things that they could do that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, I don't know. I just feel that that private development is what is needed. We're not a nation that's used to governmental funding of the arts like they are in Europe. But I think that if we had ad hoc groups that really cared about the arts and really wanted to do something about the arts, I think that educational systems could still be worked out with music, and that music could be the vibe. I mean, instead of just making sure that we have the Christmas concerts every year and the marching band is available for the football games and the basketball games, then there would be more musical opportunities.
You know, you talked about visually impaired students participating in the marching band. That just seems so incredible to me. It must take a tremendous amount of focus and concentration.
I can't comment on that because I have no experience with it. I just know that it's been done.
So you've also been involved also with choral groups?
Recently, yes, I sang in a couple of different choral groups.
And how does that work? Since you know, do they always have music available for you that's in Braille?
Not always. Sometimes music is available in Braille. Sometimes we look up things on the internet. I would look up things on the internet, and the words would be written out, especially if we were singing in foreign languages, and have to work. There are also ways to learn diction. Of course, I'm lucky because I live. You know, my wife is a linguist, so it was easy to learn. Easier to learn words with her than I would if I didn't have access. So, but we all had different ways. We all had different ways of memorizing. Some memorized strictly by Braille, and some, like me, I memorized strictly by CDs and so forth, and I had all of that music stored away in my memory, music as well as words.
And you're married to Mindy?
Yes.
And she's a great music lover as well.
Yes.
Yeah, so what advice do you have for young people or for parents who are interested in knowing what they can do for young people who are interested in learning more about music communication?
I think that reading about it is essential. I think that talking to people who have been involved with music in the past, if you have children who are musically inclined, start them on a musical instrument as early as possible. One way, for instance, if you can tell that a child is going to play, if a child can pick out notes on a piano without banging, then he'll be a musician. If he can pick out notes with one finger at a time and one note at a time, that's a sign that he could have a musical future.
And what should be done for a child who has a musical future? What are the options as you see it? Is piano first what you recommend first, or?
Well, I'm prejudiced. A piano first, but also he should be exposed to all the other instruments and let him decide eventually. But the piano is the two foundations of all instruments are the piano and the acoustic guitar. Those are the two foundations for all musical instruments.
So have I talked you into singing something for us?
No. You'll have to come to services to hear me sing.
Of all the things that you've done with respect to music and music communication, what do you enjoy the most?
I enjoy everything. I think I probably what I enjoy is listening to old music reinterpreted in different ways by different musicians, not just by the old masters, but also new and up and coming musicians as well. That's probably what I enjoy the most.
Herman, can I count on you to come back on Forum 360?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you so much. On behalf of Forum 360, our special guest today, Herman Rubin, musician, piano tuner, researcher, lecturer. On behalf of Forum 360, I'm Sally Henning.
Forum 360 is brought to you with support from Electric Impulse Communications, Kim and Harvey Nelson, Rubber City Radio Group, Akronist.com, AkronBuzz.com, Medical Mutual of Ohio, Forum 360 supporters, and the Shaw Jewish Community Center of Akron.